Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Gina Martinez. I'm class of 2006. Brown University alums have always had a commitment to social justice, and our alumni association strove to bring various speakers that would further equity causes. In response to the death of George Floyd in May 2020, the Brown Club of Orange County, like many people across the country, wanted to formalize our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We thus formed the Diversity Committee. In our second event, the Diversity Committee of the Brown Club of Orange County is proud to host filmmaker Betsy West, class of 1973. We are excited to celebrate women at Brown with a conversation about West's documentary on the acclaimed civil rights trailblazer, Pauli Murray. Before I turn it over to our moderator, I just need to do a bit of housekeeping. When it's time for the Q&A, we ask that you use the raise hand function to indicate that you have a question or comment. Chat has been turned off. You can find the raise hand icon on a desktop under reactions or on a cell phone or tablet under the word more. When it's your turn to ask a question, you'll be sent an unmute request and you'll then be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. And now I'm pleased to introduce the chair of the Diversity Committee, Carl Shulkin.
Thank you, Gina. When our club decided we wanted to sponsor an event as part of the celebration of 130 years of women at Brown, the Diversity Committee was asked to recommend an alumna who might serve as the featured speaker at such an event. My son Todd, class of 93, suggested we invite Betsy West of the class of 73. Todd had recently worked with Betsy and her co-producer, director, Julie Cohen, on their documentary, Julia. Todd discovered in the course of working with her that Betsy had graduated from Brown. As it turns out, Betsy is not only an alum, she has also served 2 terms as a trustee of the university. When I contacted her to invite her to be our featured speaker, she immediately responded, "Ever true." Given her distinguished body of work, including the Oscar-nominated, Emmy Award-winning film RBG, I didn't want to ask Betsy to give us yet another talk on her best-known film or on the recently released documentary on the life of Julia Child, about which she had been interviewed multiple times in the past few months. When I investigated further, I discovered that she and her co-director had recently released yet another documentary on a very accomplished woman, civil rights icon Pauli Murray. After watching My Name is Pauli Murray myself, I was convinced that it was an equally outstanding film, one which deserves much greater public attention than it has received. I asked Betsy whether she thought it appropriate to focus in her talk primarily on this lesser-known recent masterwork. She readily agreed. Betsy, thank you very much for agreeing to be our featured speaker tonight and for taking time out from promoting your latest creation, Gabby Gifford's Won't Back Down, which premiered last week at the South by Southwest Film Festival. We are delighted that you've taken time out from your busy schedule to join us tonight. Since no one associated with our club possesses any expertise in filmmaking, once Betsy agreed to be our featured speaker, we began our search for someone with experience as a filmmaker and knowledge of the subject matter covered in My Name is Pauli Murray to act as our commentator. My wife reminded me that a former student of hers had all of the expertise we were looking for. That former student, Aaron Rahsaan Thomas, is an acclaimed screenwriter, television producer, and adjunct faculty member at the USC Film School. My wife and I are devoted fans of his hit series SWAT on CBS. Aaron has recently joined Kenya Barris and Rashida Jones as principal partners in BET Studios, a venture offering equity ownership to Black content creators. We are delighted he has generously agreed to take time out from his busy schedule to be our commentator. For tonight, at least, he has become an honorary Brown alum. Welcome, Aaron, and thank you very much for joining us. And now I will get out of the way and turn things over first to Betsy and then to Aaron so that you and the audience can enjoy the real substance of tonight's program. Betsy, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, hello, Brunonians. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. Yeah, I have, you know, such a love for Brown. My father was a Brown grad, and you know, when I was in high school, I thought, oh, I'm not going to go to this place, but then I was just, you know, drawn to Brown, and was very happy to have spent the 4 years there on the quad. And then the same thing happened with my daughter. She kept saying, no, 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 I don't want to go to Brown. I don't want to go to Brown. But then when she visited, and she is a graduate of 3 or 4 years ago. So anyway, ever true. Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Aaron, for agreeing to moderate this. I mean, I'll just briefly say about Pauli Murray. Yes, not as well known as RBG, Julia Child, even Gabby Giffords, I think, but someone who my filmmaking partner and I were just drawn to when we first learned about Pauli from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When we were making the Ruth Bader Ginsburg film, those of you who've seen My Name is Pauli Murray, which is on Amazon, you'll see the connection that, you know, when then litigator Ginsburg was looking into women's laws and involving women, there wasn't much written. There really wasn't much legal theory about it all. She talked about going to the library and basically spending a month and reading everything that there was to read, including several essays that Pauli Murray co-authored about using the 14th Amendment to win equal rights for women. And that was, you know, when we first learned about Pauli Murray. And then subsequent to that film coming out, Julie and I just did a little Googling, discovered there were a couple of really great biographies. It's not as if we, you know, are the first people to look into Pauli Murray. Pauli's legacy has been known, especially African-American academic women have been lifting up the story of Pauli Murray for a while. And then we thought, well, you know, maybe we could make a documentary. Maybe we have the opportunity to do this. And, you know, we were lucky that I think because of the success of RBG that we're able to get the funding necessary to embark on this. So that's really the story of how it happened. And, you know, I'd love to talk more. You know, Pauli's story is so huge. We were talking before, covers so many aspects of 20th century life and, you know, social justice issues, LGBTQ issues, incredible, you know, legal turning points in America. We can talk about all, you know, many of those things, but anyway, thank you, Aaron. Nice.
Well, Betsy, thank you. Thank you for sharing the film with us. I'm going to give just kind of a brief context of, you know, what certainly draws me to this subject matter, and I want to get right into, you know, the film itself and all of the good stuff, why the people have come.
Yeah.
But certainly, as you mentioned, you know, my background is that I attended an HBCU. I attended Morehouse College, and that was the first place that I had heard about any kind of discussion, you know, regarding, you know, Pauli and you know, kind of what her impact has been on the world. Spelman College, which is a all women's college, just right across the street from Morehouse, which is a traditionally all male college. Pauli's always been a personal hero for a lot of the women that I knew who went through
Right.
Spelman. So the first time I had heard about her was in undergraduate, but it always blew me away. And I think the film elaborates on it as to how influential she really was behind the scenes and how little is still known about her, which I would love to discuss in just a second as to perhaps reasons why and why we're just now starting to hear more about her. But certainly, I'm just so happy that the film exists. I'm happy that you and Julie took it on as a subject matter. And I also I know that you've discussed RBG a million billion different times, but I do think it's important to look at at this film also in context with in comparison to the approach that you took on RBG. So if you will humor me, you know, a few questions that I will have will be kind of
Yeah.
a comparison contrast with it. So I think the best way to start off this conversation would be is to get kind of the nuts and bolts out of the way, which is, you know, you mentioned it already. You were making RBG. It sounds like during the course of making RBG, you were introduced to this, you know, this idea of Paulie. Can you take us through a little bit of what drew you to her as a subject for a film? And for that matter, what draws you to subjects, period, for films? Why the people that you've chosen as opposed to, you know, hundreds or thousands of other people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a nutshell, it's like people who have made a difference, people who really matter, people who have done something that we can all learn from. And, you know, how did that happen? How did they come to do this? Because you know, nobody when they're 18 years old knows what they're going to do with their life. You know, how did it happen, you know, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg became the legal architect of the women's movement? It certainly wasn't something that she set out to do. And I think similarly, Pauli Murray was very ambitious, and yet didn't really know even that she was going to become a lawyer until, you know, the realities of life in America for an African American person in the, you know, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, caught up with Paulie in a way. And her reaction was, I've got to do something about the injustice that I'm experiencing and that other people are experiencing. And I need some tools. And the law is a tool that I can use. And so when we started to learn this story, we thought, wow, here's a person who changed America, but nobody really knows about Paulie. Not nobody, some people know about Paulie, but Paulie's not in high school textbooks. You know, Paulie is not a household name, and, you know, maybe we can help illuminate some of the reasons why more people should know about Pauli Murray. So that was kind of our motivation. The real question was, how do you make a movie about someone who's been deceased for over 30 years? Paulie died in 1985. And, you know, we Googled and found a couple of audio interviews that were online. And that was sort of intriguing that material was there. And then we discovered that Paulie's archive was at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard, and got in touch with them. I had known people at the library from a previous project, and they told me how voluminous Paulie's archive was. It was huge, and it included, we discovered, a lot of audio tapes, a lot of audio interviews, which Paulie had deliberately saved. I mean, it's really as if Pauli Murray had a sense of leaving all of this material so that, you know, maybe people in Paulie's own generation didn't recognize Paulie's importance, but later generations might. It's like it was waiting for people there. So when we discovered that there was that material, we thought, let's try, you know, that let's try and do that. We were really inspired by the story and wanted more people to know about Pauli Murray.
I think, you know, so interesting. One of the really fascinating things that I find about Pauli Murray, and by the way, making a deliberate effort, because Paulie was so ahead of Paulie's time as far as gender identification and pronouns, and we're now, you know, we're still in the midst of reconciling a lot of that. That I'm going to try very hard to refer to Paulie as Paulie, you know, throughout, because
if you stumble, don't worry, Aaron. I mean, I don't think we should feel bad for calling Paulie she sometimes. I mean, you know, all of Paulie's friends and relatives referred to Pauli Murray as a woman, because Paulie herself at that time was referring to herself as a woman. It was really Paulie's being non-binary was a private struggle that Paulie didn't really talk about, other than reaching out to doctors and other people. So yeah, I try to say Paulie as much as possible, but sometimes it's hard.
In many ways, Paulie was so far ahead of the time that it's almost unbelievable. You know, I think as you mentioned before, I think it's so timely that we're discussing Paulie during a time where we're witnessing the Supreme Court confirmation hearings of Ketanji Brown Jackson, because in some ways she has a lot in common with both RBG and with Paulie, and if there is a mix of the two, you know, visions, if you will, she's as close to that vision as you'll get current day. There are a few, you know, quotes that you included in this film that I would love to get your take on, that I thought were really poignant coming from Paulie, which was one that's very apropos. Brave African Americans whose work get lost with history seems to be more appropriate for her than almost any other figure of the 20th century. And then the other is, you know, the desire to live to see lost causes found. So
Yeah, yeah, I love that line.
And considering that Paulie is kind of the intersection, if you will, of almost every hot button identity you could possibly imagine. You had, you know, identified as a woman, which is already tough enough, African American, LGBTQ plus, and also there's mental health issues, and also didn't necessarily grow up in the wealthiest environment either from the beginning, although it wasn't dirt poor. But if I had to make a concoction of what's the toughest road to becoming prominent in any industry in the United States, that would come pretty close. That mixture is a pretty good goulash.
Yeah.
So would you mind talking about, you know, just what Paulie represented then and how that perception has adjusted or changed or may have the potential to change now in the current time period that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that live to see my lost causes found, but of course, Paulie didn't live to see all of Paulie's lost causes found. And, you know, when Paulie died in 1985, the gay rights movement was just really coming of age. And, you know, Paulie never lived in a time when Paulie could be openly gay or non-binary or whatever it is that Paulie would have considered. So that's certainly a huge change from when Paulie lived. But the other thing I want to say is and something which we didn't include in the movie, among many other things, because Paulie's life was so full. You know, Paulie wrote a letter to Richard Nixon in, I think it was 1972, when there was an opening on the Supreme Court, and basically said, hey, look at me. You know, you've never had a woman and you've never had an African American woman, and I'm really qualified. And the letter says something like, I know you're probably never going to read this letter, but you know, maybe it will cause some amusement for your staff, but maybe they'll also think about it a little bit. So I think you're right that the fact that we're having these hearings now of Judge Jackson, so many years after, how many years is it? Basically 50 years after Paulie wrote that letter, is pretty extraordinary. I mean, Paulie was a person who was totally ahead of the times in so many areas. It you know, that became an organizing principle of the documentary. It's actually kind of how we helped structure the documentary, was, you know, highlighting those times, either, you know, refusing to go to the back of the bus or desegregating the restaurants, and putting the years, how many years ahead of the time Paulie was from those efforts that are more publicly known.
So I thought that was very effective, the context that you're able to give us with the amount of time prior to the, you know, the mainstream awareness of some of these events that were occurring. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the format, you know, the format of the film and the decisions you made. You know, RBG a different film tonally. You know, use music differently. You know, obviously had a lot of archival footage, even recent archival footage to pull from. With Paulie, as you said, part of the challenge being that you had to really dig back in time to grab some of this. Can you tell us about some of the creative decisions you made? You obviously had the you know, the self-recorded, well, the interview sessions that she did, and I want you to give context for that, but also decisions that you made, such as using artwork, you know, to kind of transition into real images, the use of score, which was a little different than when you're dealing with the notorious RBG and you can work in pop music and hip hop.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your approach and to the you know, to the creative choices that you made in this film?
You know, I think one of the first things that Julie and I and Talea Bridget McMahon, who was our producer on this and who was and really also our editor, Cinque Northern. I mean, we were a real team. And one of the things we talked about at the beginning was making the film in Paulie's voice. Do we have enough to be able to do that? Either using the audio recordings or sometimes, you know, excerpts from letters and diaries, like really making it, this is Paulie narrating Paulie's story as much as possible. That was, I think, the major creative decision. And then we lucked into, in addition to these interviews that Paulie did, you know, later in life when Paulie became the Episcopal priest, people would come to interview Paulie. You know, Charles Kuralt famously did a story on about Pauli Murray, and so we have a little bit of video of Paulie. And feminist scholars, often students, would do interviews about Paulie's role in the women's movement, having been an early, you know, a founding member of NOW. So that's where that material came from. But we had an intern, a paid intern, working for us that summer, who we asked to look into a photo that had a credit on a National Park Service library just to find out, could we use this photo? And when she called up the library, she said, do you have anything else about Pauli Murray? And the person said, well, we've got a sculpture of Pauli Murray's hand. They're like, okay, well, I don't think they can use that. But then they said, but we also have a bunch of cassettes, audio cassettes that are labeled Pauli Murray. And this turned out to be Paulie reading Paulie's autobiography, written at the end of Paulie's life for the benefit of a friend who was going blind. And Paulie really wanted the friend to be able to hear this autobiography. So it's not the entire book, but it was like 3/4 of it. So then we really knew we could do this first person narrating the story. So when you see the documentary, it sounds like it's just somewhat seamless, but through our sound technician, you know, we were using interviews from all over the place, different sound qualities, and trying to, you know, make it sound as if it were pretty seamless. So that was, I think, that was a big decision. The music, really important. Jonique Bontemps was our composer. He really loved Paulie's story, dove into it. And I think he had a very hard job, like going between some pretty dark moments, you know, talking about growing up in the Jim Crow South and some of the things that Paulie witnessed, and then more, you know, playful, upbeat moments. Paulie riding the rails. I mean, it starts out Paulie's in the Depression and pretty, you know, and so hungry, you know, that she's virtually malnourished. And then you move from that to Paulie riding the rails. And, you know, as Paulie wrote about it, it was kind of a great adventure. You know, she's young and going across the country and discovering things. And I think, you know, Jonique did. And then, of course, getting the right tone for Paulie's very private letters about being non-binary and the struggle to find answers to that. So this was a pretty wide range of music, and we really relied pretty much on Jonique's composed music, as opposed to, as you said, Aaron, with RBG, we were pulling hip hop and pop music and classical music and operas and having fun, a little more fun with it. And it didn't seem right with Paulie. It felt like this needed, a more deliberate treatment. So we were lucky to have Jonique working on that.
There's almost there was kind of I mean, first of all, a lot of credit to Jonique and the work that was done, because that obviously, I mean, it requires, as you said, just such a wide range of choices that all must feel like a cohesive whole, telling a story. There's kind of a Huck Finn quality, I thought, to the early
I know.
the early adventures.
Yeah.
But I also wonder too, and I know this one's probably, it's impossible to answer, but just, based on the sources that you spoke with, I mean, obviously Paulie's unique in that there is a deep reservoir of recorded material that for a documentary filmmaker is a gold mine, of course. I've been fortunate to make a couple of documentaries in my life, and that's always the hardest part, is trying to scramble and get enough, archival, footage and images to kind of piece something together. In this case, when you hit the gold mine like this and you realize that Paulie had recorded a lot of the things that were done early, what was your first thought, aside from like, wow, we have a film, what was your first thought on Paulie? Is that a sign of having an awareness that this story will be told at some point, or is there a little bit of mental illness, I must ask, or is there just kind of a narcissism of everything I do must, is important enough to record, or a combination of all?
Yeah. I don't see Paulie as a narcissist. I do think that Paulie struggled with mental health issues, no question about it, and had incredible ups and downs and depression, and also apparently some thyroid issues at one point that may have affected that. So I do think that Paulie struggled with mental illness. I don't see Paulie as a narcissist. Someone who was very confident and kind of straight ahead and driven. Paulie's niece just talked about Paulie staying up into the night and typing, and there really was this sense, I guess, of Paulie of just having to get out Paulie's story, having to finish that autobiography, I think, is a document for what Paulie went through, and an understanding that this story, Paulie's story, the story of African Americans in the 20th century, the story of Paulie's grandparents and Paulie's family, which was a mixed race family that Paulie wrote about in a book called Proud Shoes, which some people say is kind of a precursor to Roots, wrote that book in the 1950s, of just a sense of history, a sense of, I'm living this life, and it's reflective of something really important going on in a country that Paulie, really admired and really loved the country, and yet also had great disappointments in America, and just wanted to leave this as a document. So, that's how I see it.
I thought one of the really interesting aspects was Paulie's trip to Ghana. And realization. My wife is from Ghana, so I thought
Oh, wow.
I found a very particular parallel.
Wow.
And I can relate in some ways. Paulie's assessment of going to a foreign country and realizing how American, her experience had been up until that point, and how much of an ownership that was felt regarding the United States. I understand in many ways. There seemed to be, even with that trip though, and amongst other things that were done, a deliberate awareness, a self-awareness of blazing trails. It felt like almost everything, the film does a good job of also giving context to with each achievement, and some of that's just the times, I know, but some of that I have to believe that was deliberate, of each achievement being kind of the first of its kind, going to Ghana, teaching there, teaching law, you know, coming back, you know, being a part of the Episcopalian Church and looking to become a priest. You know, these aren't things that are never, they're not, they didn't seem to be necessarily randomly chosen. So what I also wonder is on that part, on her part, you know, was there a sense from the people who knew Paulie that these were things that were important for the journey, you know, for the story, or, you know, there's some people who are built where it's just there's a natural curiosity to just gain and learn and
Yeah.
move on to the next thing. You know,
Yeah.
she's a little bit different than RBG, in that RBG seemed to have one quest and kind of stuck to it all the way through.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, RBG focused in like a laser on the law, you know, just had a love of the law. And, you know, Paulie ultimately got frustrated with what the law could do, you know, and that was, you know, the move toward becoming a priest. Had always been religious. But I think, you know, I think Paulie was restless, a restless person, you know, always move. You could ask yourself, okay, goes to Howard, meets Thurgood Marshall, Spotswood Robinson, all these big deal guys, NAACP lawyers. Why didn't Paulie become a lawyer for the NAACP? You know, why didn't that happen? And part of me, you know, maybe they were sexist and they didn't want to have a woman. You know, there's been that accusation of the hierarchy of the civil rights movement. But I also think it was Paulie's restlessness kind of moving on to the next thing. And I think Ghana was a part of that, to the opportunity to go to a place that was newly independent, and to help build the law school. I mean, Paulie didn't just teach there. Paulie was helping to create the curriculum and to get the country started. And then, you know, was very disillusioned when it looked like Paulie was in some danger for preaching about democracy and ideas that the new government wasn't so happy about, and security people, you know, showed up in Paulie's classroom. It was like, uh-oh, you know, maybe I'm in trouble here and maybe I want to go back to America. But
which, by the way, it's a whole aside conversation. My wife has a very different perspective on
yeah,
it. And Americans coming in and having our own expectations about what democracy should be, and
should be, and
yes,
maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe Paulie was, you know, just didn't stay long enough to understand the nuances of this. I mean, you know, I don't know. A feeling though that, okay, I've got to move on to something else. And, you know, that wound up being, you know, the women's movement for a while, and something else, which Paulie, you know, Paulie was very critical of the National Organization for Women, also having helped Betty Friedan come up with the idea and start now. Then Paulie felt, as many African American women did, that it was too white a movement, that it wasn't really, you know, taking into consideration not only people of color, but just people in economic circumstances that were not the same as the women who were starting now. I mean, Paulie was critical of now as well. I mean, someone who just was really a straight talker and had very high expectations for how, you know, Paulie should be treated and how everybody should be treated.
I thought something that was really fascinating to me. You know, of course, we had the election a few years ago, and there's the famous stat. You know, when they count up the voters for Hillary, I think it's 94% of Black women voters voted for Hillary, and
I
like
know.
45% of white women.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
I remember feeling it very palpable from my mother, my sisters, my wife. They're like, "What the hell, man? Like, are we in it or together or not?" So, in watching your film, certainly, if they felt that way in, you know, modern day, I can't imagine what Paulie might have felt like, you know, at the time when all of that started.
Yeah.
I do wonder if, you know, if there's also going to be more to unpack regarding kind of the early fights, you know, just for equality within the women's movement, you know, kind of the microcosm within any of those movements, because certainly the civil rights had its own discrepancies for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really interesting. And the whole idea of intersectionality, which has become, you know, a byword in the past 20 years of reaching out to women of all circumstances. I mean, that started, I think, in a way with Paulie talking about Jane Crow. You know, it's not just, Paulie says when at Howard University, you know, she's idealistic and thinking, I'm going here to learn about civil rights, and then is, you know, is treated as a second class citizen, as a woman, and talking about, you know, I'm in a special category here. I've got two problems, you know, I'm being discriminated against as an African American, and I'm being discriminated against as a woman. And that really is at the heart of the whole understanding of intersectionality, you know, that she got really early on.
Right. I also wonder, you know, tone wise with the film, and you've already hit on it in discussing the music. Obviously, you know, I mean, Paulie was, you know, part of the cost, you could argue, of being so far ahead of your time is that there are many times where you get a sense that, I mean, maybe by choice, that hers was a lonely existence, you know, at times whereas with RBG, there was a love of a family and a husband and a real support and kind of a cheering section. It feels like Paulie's cheering section is still developing before our eyes. Whereas in her time, she didn't really have it. Was there any sense for her of, or the people around her at least, to be able to talk about her? Were there, you know, was there any, she talked about like not writing with bitterness and writing really more with compassion. Was that something that you got a sense that really was something that she carried with her, or you know, or was that something that was more kind of a bolstering, you know, that she would use to kind of encourage herself?
I mean, I think if you read Paulie's poetry, like, you know, I'm not like a big poetry reader, but I have to say that I think Paulie's book, Dark Testament, is very beautiful. And, you know, some of the images there are really tough and brutal and beautiful. So I think she had that ability, and yet there was a kind of generosity about Paulie. He wanted to move beyond it. And, you know, people have been sort of baffled a little bit. Some people, I mean, including Paulie's own friends, including RBG, baffled by Paulie's turn toward religion. I mean, you saw in the soundbite I mean, RBG said that, you know, I just didn't quite understand this religious thing. And, you know, Paulie did want to connect with people. And I think as a priest, Paulie felt that this kind of one-on-one connection with people in a congregation was really meaningful to her. You know, but deep belief in humanity and in the importance of just helping people one-on-one. I mean, it's very idealistic. And some people found it a little baffling. But in terms of, you know, finding happiness, I actually think that after, you know, this difficulty in the 30s and the 40s, trying to come to terms with being non-binary, you see Paulie having what the few people who knew about it say was a fulfilled relationship with Renee Barlow, the woman that Paulie met at Paul Weiss. I mean, they didn't have the joy of living together openly, and, you know, and yet they did rely on each other. And, you know, that a lot of people have said it makes them happy to think that Paulie found that. And then, of course, was just devastated when Renee died.
Yeah, one of the more heartbreaking aspects of the film, for sure. You know, certainly covering their relationship and a lot of the photos that you use and the score underneath that, I think, you know, was really effective and compelling, and helped to, in many ways, kind of give a very tender side to Paulie, who otherwise, as you said, was known to be a very straight shooter, no nonsense.
Yeah.
the film definitely had its own sense of humor, but I think, like you said, that balance of kind of being able to go from really tough, harsh subjects and transitioning into lighter fare was a different challenge, I'm sure, than other films.
Julie and I have this thing about any opportunity to have a laugh even in a serious documentary, we go for it. So when you have the dog barking and she's reprimanding it, I mean, we lean into that because, these are tough subjects. So you have to have a little bit of a break.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of very organic pieces of humor I thought in this, where the bits of just humanity, the dog moment is being one. I thought the two students from
Oh, the
Brandeis
students, yeah.
is like you could see them going back to being students when they were referring to her and how she spoke to them, and and even their sense, which I somehow completely understood, even though it was super vague, of knowing that Paulie was definitely, even back then, LGBTQ plus, even though that wasn't a term.
Yeah.
But I get it, when they were talking about it. One of the things too that when I look at the existence of the film and I look at the existence of the film in regards to the collection of the other subjects that you have, I mean, one can't ignore for sure, certainly coming from my POV, that Paulie had very significant interactions writing to Eleanor Roosevelt, Nixon, RBG. Without those specific interactions, or rather, I should ask, do you feel like she had a sense that she deliberately needed to reach out to prominent white people, basically, to make sure that people knew who she was? Because if those same letters, let's say, were going to Martin Luther King and even Thurgood Marshall, or to whoever you want to pick, would there be the same awareness now as far as wanting to make films about her, and even having awareness to even think about it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Paulie saw who was in power. FDR is in power. FDR is saying this stuff about the University of North Carolina being such a progressive place. It just pissed Paulie off, did lead to this relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt. And I think, that relationship, Patricia Bell Scott wrote a whole biography called The Firebrand and the First Lady. Patricia Bell Scott was one of the consultants on our film, because there is something sort of amazing about these two unlikely friends coming from such different experiences. So yeah, I guess that's part of the appeal. But it's also just indicative of how Paulie wanted to make a difference. And I did have a good relationship with Thurgood Marshall, who knew Paulie from that early, bus arrest incident and onward. But I think that, the interaction with people in power, I mean, when Paulie knew RBG was not a, famous person or somebody, who knew that RBG was going to become who she became. That was really just as a part of Paulie's role at the ACLU, where she was on the board for a while. So
I thought an interesting, there's a phrase that you mentioned in the film that I take to heart, that Paulie went from being a talker to becoming a listener.
Yeah.
Which I like to think is actually part of the documentary filmmaking process, is being able to listen to and really kind of pick up what the story is, which is different from my day job is writing stories and creating stories, and it's often the opposite, where you're basically talking a lot and determining what things will be, and with a documentary filmmaker is getting out of the way and allowing the story to actually clarify itself. In this case, and with this film and this process of going through the archival footage and all of the wonderful things that monumental things that Paulie's achieved. How would you describe the process as you went? You know, there's some people that go in and kind of have a sense of what story they think they're going to tell, or story they may want to tell. For some people, it kind of develops as it goes. Some people are afraid of that, not having that roadmap. You know, it's kind of jumping out of a plane and figuring it out.
Yeah.
You know,
No, it's a little, in some ways it's scarier and than doing a narrative film, because you can't write your way out of the thing. Do you know what I mean? You can't just make up a plot or just some little turn that's going to help you motivate the person. I mean, it has to all be real, and it also has to all be there. Like, you have to have the sound bites that work, or the interviews that tell you, or the pieces of sound. You know, in this documentary, I would say, and it went through an incredible evolution. I mean, we did have some of the structural things that we talked about, Paulie's own voice and doing things ahead of time as a kind of structure piece. Also, putting Paulie's niece as our kind of investigator, you know, going into the archive, discovering about this person. I mean, these were kind of structural devices that we did early on. The hardest part for us was dealing with Paulie's non-binary status and struggles, and trying to, as two white straight women, you know, trying to understand and to accurately reflect, you know, not only what Paulie was going through, and, you know, we included as much really as there was in the archive of that, but what it means for people today, you know, for people, you know, like Paulie, who see Paulie as a beacon in the LGBTQ community, which we're not a part of. And so it was a lot of outreach and ultimately interviews with three of the activists that you see in the film, to put this in, put Paulie into a modern context. And that was something that I think we hadn't intended to do at the beginning. We sort of felt like, okay, let's just tell this Paulie story, and then people can make of it what they will. But it seemed really important, just because Paulie lived in a time when there wasn't any language to describe what Paulie was experiencing. And now we do have a language, and now we do have a little more understanding, maybe not universal understanding, but you know, it was a learning experience for Julie and me, and, you know, Cinque and Talea, to come to grips with that aspect of Paulie's life, and to put it in the right context, or to try to.
If you don't mind me asking, just following up on that, I mean, this is kind of a two-parter, but one, what's been the reception, if any, from, you know, the LGBTQ plus audience, and also people of color? And then number two, and, you know, I don't have images of everyone who was on the team, but I'm assuming that you had at least some people of color on the team. CQ.
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm making assumptions, but can you talk about what their response was, as well as they joined the team, and as you work through a lot of this, the putting together the film?
Yeah, I mean, Julie and I had a conversation at the beginning, like, okay, how can we really do this story as two white women? I think we thought, look, we have an opportunity. It's not like everybody was clamoring to do the story of Pauli Murray. It's not like we were in a competitive environment here, like nobody else was really doing this. And we felt that because of the success of RBG, we could get the funding to do it. And like the first step was approaching Talea Bridges McMahon, who is a very experienced producer, and with whom both Julie and I had worked on a project about the modern women's movement, you know, about, I guess, 10 years ago. And, you know, I just really admire and respect Talea, loved working with her then when she was a pretty junior producer at the time. And she'd subsequently gone on and done a whole bunch of documentaries with Skip Gates about the African-American experience, you know, the rivers, many rivers to cross, a whole bunch of those things. And she is African-American, and she was really our first stop. Like you, Talea had heard of Pauli Murray, you know, as an African-American, and also as someone who'd done history, but she didn't really know the whole story. And when she started to read about Paulie, she was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And she, you know, jumped on board. We felt it was very important to have all the top members of the team, you know, be diverse. And so our editor and our composer, our artist, Diana Ejeda, I mean, pretty much all of the top level people, you know, making editorial decisions on the and creative input on the film were people of color. One of our archivist. That was important, and you know, they brought a very important perspective. I mean, Talea, especially in terms of telling Paulie's family story, was extremely sensitive of how we portrayed that, and I think, you know, made just major contributions. But Talea did most of the research at Harvard, and you know, we really relied on her a lot.
This is in regards specifically to the kind of the colorism, so to speak, in their family, the being coming from a mixed race family, and kind of the history.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Paulie wrote about, yes, but also sort of how we portrayed the family. I think it was really interesting. Talea had the insight about how important the stability of Paulie's family was. You know, how that Aunt Pauline really gave Paulie a good start in life, even though Paulie had a tough start in life because both parents had basically disappeared and Paulie was an orphan at age 3. But then Aunt Pauline took this young girl and really nurtured Paulie. And that's what yeah, it's one of the things that Talea wanted us to really emphasize, was the strength of the family that Paulie came from, that allowed her to do all the things that Paulie ultimately did.
I hate to interrupt this really interesting conversation, but we're getting near the end of our time. So I think we'd like to open it up to people in the audience. So use the raise hand function. I actually have set it that everybody can unmute themselves. So please use the raise hand function, which is in reactions or under more. And when I see it, I will call on you and then you can unmute yourself. We'll start with Scott.
Thank you. Betsy and Aaron, thank you very much for this amazing discussion that you're having. And Betsy, I want to thank you personally for these movies. As a gay man as well as a Brown grad, it was thrilling for me to learn about Pauli Murray, who was somebody that I had no idea, never heard of before. And you know, I've been an activist in LGBTQ rights since I graduated from Brown in 1979. Whenever I encounter, and our club has hosted many interesting alumni from Brown, and whenever I encounter somebody as articulate and creative as you are, I always wonder how Brown informed your experience and what impact that had on your decision of a career. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
I can speak a little bit. Aaron, you are an honorary Brunonian here, like to have to listen to us. Yeah, I mean, you know, I took Bob Scholl's incredible courses, you know, on narrative and structure at Brown. I didn't really know where they were going to lead, but I just, you know, I was a great novel reader, and I just love the way he deconstructed a narrative, and I think that has helped me in my work. And the other thing, you know, I was on the Brown Film Society in those days, was really important to all of us since we didn't have Netflix or anything else. We, would show 6 or 7 movies a week, and often 16 millimeter little projectors. And so I was a movie nut at Brown, and then I also worked for the Brown Daily Herald, but doing more arts coverage mostly. It was, I have great memories. I also feel like, oh my God, why didn't I take more history? Why didn't I take more economics? Why didn't I do this? Basically, I took a lot of English courses because I just loved it so much. And because of the new curriculum, you didn't have to do anything that you didn't want to do.
Thank you.
Bill, know it? You can unmute yourself, I think.
Hi, thank you. This is just a wonderful conversation and I'm really enjoying it. I guess I'm just curious about your influences around making documentaries in particular. I know there's a lot of history, a lot of different people who've made documentaries over the years, still are. And you talked specifically on Pauli Murray about how you wanted to let Paulie's voice lead the film. But in general, I mean, Ken Burns is, like they have these different kinds of ways. There's the narrator who's talking, there's the archival photos and the video. And I'm just curious how you've decided over the years to go about your process.
Yeah, I mean, I was a network television news producer for a number of years, but I was always gravitating toward long form. And I always loved stories that didn't have like a voice of God narrator, stories that were narrated by, the protagonist or somebody else, that you could find a natural way to tell the story. And, I think the biggest influence for me and for many documentarians was when Hoop Dreams came out. I don't know if you all know what Hoop Dreams was. It's just like, it was a freaking revelation. It's like they did, and I recently saw it. I don't know if you've seen it recently, Aaron. They like remastered it, and
Betsy, when you're done with this, I have a little tidbit to give you, but go ahead and finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so beautiful. It's 3 hours long. It's just the most, to me, an incredible film of showing how a documentary can be about some really important issues, but also tell a story and be a narrative. And, I was really taken with that. I do like stories that are deep and take you to worlds that you don't know, take you behind the scenes where you learn things. I mean, my favorite, I'm hoping that Summer of Soul will win because I just loved that film. And I thought it was not, I mean, everybody talks about the concerts and this revelation of these concerts that were going on in Harlem, in 1973, I can't remember what year, no, maybe 1969, I guess 1969, that nobody, that people had forgotten about. But what's amazing, I think, about that film is the way it weaves context, gives you the backdrop of what was going on in New York City at the time that this music was being played. And it's just so much fun to watch. I like movies, frankly, that are entertaining. I like to be drawn into a story and not feel like I'm being lectured to.
Aaron, you were gonna add something?
I mean, funny enough, because Hoop Dreams was a very seminal moment for me. It came out when I was in high school, when I was a student of Dr. Shulkin and Mrs. Shulkin. It influenced my own path. So a lot of my early films I based on that style.
Wow.
And the past 2 months, it's been my life because I'm currently adapting it. We're looking at adapting it into a TV show. So
you're kidding.
I'm talking about Hoop
Oh my
Dreams.
God.
Even just this morning. So it's funny you bring that up because I can't escape it. It is.
That's amazing.
But I do agree, a very impactful, influential film, and very much kind of fly on the wall kind of feel of you being in the moment as opposed to being guided through it with
right. But it's a fly on the wall that is controlled. Like it's not, you see some films that are very, they call verite films, and they're just so sloppy. And it's like, I don't understand what's going on. Where are we going? I mean, that film has a narrative, even though it's both fly on the wall, but it's very, very cleverly structured. I love it.
I don't see any more raised hands, but the two of you feel free to keep talking because it's
Can I
really great when you talk.
I just want to piggyback on the last point you made, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand when they look at documentaries how much structure does go into even the ones that feel like you're amongst the people living life. Can you tell us, and it makes a ton of sense that obviously you had a broadcast journalism background, because that definitely shows. Can you tell us a little bit about your decisions when you look to structure? Give us some examples of how you tend to do that in a way that I think wouldn't be necessarily obvious to the layman. Obviously, when you have narrators, it's very obvious because that person's telling you this is the beginning and this is where we're at, and then this is the end. But when you're doing it, which I think requires a little bit, more subtlety, what are the things you're looking for to give us those tempos?
Yeah, I mean, we're basically creating scenes, often. And so, in Pauli Murray, there's the scene of Paulie's niece, Karen, going to the Schlesinger Library and starting to discover about Aunt Pauline. And then that leads into the scene of Paulie getting on the bus with Paulie's friend, going down to Easter, suddenly getting into the TIFF, being arrested. So, we sort of, the way we often do our documentaries is we cut the scenes first, kind of rough, like we don't fine cut them, but we kind of put them together. And then we figure out how they're going to string out. I mean, should I show that crazy Jamboard thing?
I think it's helpful to have a visual, with the understanding that, it's overall, I think is a really good example of how you structure scenes together.
I can share. Okay, so I'm going to share this thing. We did not do this for a variety of reasons having to do with the COVID and our editor and everything else. We didn't do this on Paulie, but we did do this on Julia. And I'm going to share this, what we call a Jamboard, and it will show you how we structured the 3 acts in the Julia Child film, even though you may not have all seen the Julia Child film, but it will still, I think, explain it. So here we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So here you can see these are all color coded according to the categories. So the opening, this orange is food photography. So, beautiful food photography is going to be included in it. And here's the opening of the film, which, we worked on a lot. But we knew we have to have an opening, and we knew it was going to include this very sexy food shooting. And so that's that. Then yellow was basically her story, the narrative of her story. So we opened with the first time she went on television, and her producer is basically telling that. So that's the first scene. And then we do a little context. So the green is kind of background and context. What was public TV like back then? It was really boring. It was really academic and boring. So that's then. And then here's a good one. Americans eating like shit. Like basically another context. Like here's the Jell-O salads and the, horrible Campbell's mushroom soup that we're eating. So these little pieces, we're moving them around. And then the French chef starts. Then we went into a kind of, so this is a yellow because it's part of her, story. And then we went into a more philosophical thing with the fancy food shooting of modern chefs talking about the meaning of food and the philosophy, what it represents, that food is love, basically. And now we're back to Julia's story. Then we go to her childhood, college, World War II, Pink is romance, Julia meets Paul. So anyway, we can move these around. We can, and then this is Act 1, and then here's Act 2. And Act 2 had a lot of moving around. They published the book, The French Chef starts. And then we do a little more context, women on TV, how you didn't see women teaching things on TV, production hardships. But, we might have, this Kennedy Allure thing got moved in 5 different places. Here's a piece that we wound up putting at the end of the thing. We had it in here, but then we moved it up and we put it at the end of the show. So anyway, that's how we, here's the Saturday Night Live Dan Aykroyd thing wound up here. So more personal stories. It just is a way to help us think about and visualize scene by scene by scene, and kind of move, like we moved this Planned Parenthood section around. Oh, that was in 5 different places. We just kept, trying to get the right balance of the story. So it is pretty structured.
We do have 2 questions now.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll, you can stop your screen share. There you go. Lisa Ryers first.
Yeah, hi. I'm really excited to see this documentary about Paulie, as well as your other documentary about Gabrielle Giffords. I went to high school with Gabby in Tucson back in the day. And people might not know that there is a Brown grad, class of '83, who is running for her seat currently in Tucson. So go Brown on that in Southern Arizona. But my question is about kind of the parallels between some of the stories perhaps you might have found between Paulie's story and what Gabby might be able to learn as her story continues, because people often refer to the gun control movement in a similar vein these days as the fight for civil rights in the 60s. And I was just wondering if you found any through lines between these 2 wonderful stories.
Yeah, I mean, look, these women, Gabby is amazing. And I think that both Paulie and Gabby faced really tough challenges. Obviously, getting shot in the head and having to come back from that kind of injury takes a special kind of person with persistence and determination. And, Pauli Murray had incredible setbacks and difficulties in life, economic and social and, racist and sexist. And you think of all the things that were thrown Pauli Murray's way, but you just get a sense that with that incredible smile, I mean, we found that one video of Paulie with the dog and that amazing smile of optimism, just like, okay, I'm just going to keep fighting. And that's the same when you see the Gabby Gifford story. It's not depressing, the Gabby Gifford story. She's unbelievable. I mean, you see what she came through. Her husband, Gabby's husband, filmed her rehab over the many months when she was in the rehab hospital. It's amazing how she learned how to talk again, and the role of music in her therapy. And it's very, and how she can sing all these songs and remember all the lyrics. And it's pretty extraordinary story. And her attitude, I think, is one that I really want to emulate. It's just very optimistic.
Okay, next we have Cameron Barrett.
Hi, everybody. So sorry to have joined as late as I did. Work kept me away. So thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Aaron. It's been fascinating, the end part that I was able to join for. Going back to the Jamboard that you showed us, Betsy, can you tell us a little bit, it's a real nuts and bolts question, just maybe some of the tools and software that you're now using, because filmmaking has changed an awful lot in the last 10 to 20 years with the tools.
Yeah, maybe Aaron can talk about that too. I mean, the Jamboard is something that our editor on Julia had discovered. And, when we did RBG, we were just putting these little posted cards on the wall and moving them around, which is what a lot of filmmakers do for scenes. This Jamboard is part of the Google Drive suite. It's free on Google Drive. If you drop down to more, it says a document or a sheet or a form, and then it says more. If you go to the more, it says Jamboard, and there it is. And so that was pretty good. I think Zoom was amazing also. For filmmakers, we were able to, one Friday we're in the office in the edit room, and the next Monday we're all in our home offices. If this had happened, if the pandemic had happened 5 years ago, I don't think we could have made either of the Julia movie or the Pauli Murray movie, which were both made, pretty much edited during the pandemic. Because you can also upload video to Vimeo or other platforms. So our editor could just, quickly upload a scene, and then we'd look at it, we'd get on to Google Docs, we'd talk about it. Hey, let's move this here, let's do this. I mean, the collaborative platforms to me are pretty amazing. But Aaron, are you using something now that's?
I mean, it's very, very similar, and just to talk about how technology is changed, when I'd made a documentary maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and we had that time I used the kind of the early version of Google Docs, but also use a program that's now, one of the few industries that did thrive through COVID are these industries like, we're talking about ways to kind of do Zoom, and also we use Writers Room Pro, which is a way to do what Betsy just showed, where it's just what they tend to do is just take what you would do in person, which is what Betsy showed you with the basically their note cards. In real life you would have them as note cards up on a board, and you can just switch them around. It's just taking those and making them virtual. So there's any number of programs that do that well. And oh, by the way, I think it actually works really well for real life too. I find myself using that for the grocery store, errands, and groceries are in yellow, and house duties are in blue or whatever. So it's a great organizational tool, period. But Google Docs you have probably already, and certainly Jamboard is a great one to use. Zoom has their own version of it, and Writers Room Pro has many different versions of it if you want to specialize or change anything up.
The other thing that's incredible is, I don't know, do you guys cut on Premiere or on Avid?
We cut on Avid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Avid's a very deep, rich, incredible editing platform that, most of the narrative films use because it can do so many things. But a lot of documentarians now use Premiere. It's an Adobe Premiere platform, and it's pretty intuitive. It's just easier to use. And, documentaries, the budgets are much lower. And, that's been another big change, is that it's just easier to edit.
Well, I don't see any more hands. So if you have any words you want to leave us with, either one of you or both of you?
What's next,
Well,
Betsy?
I don't know. My husband makes documentaries, also a Brown graduate, and he's working on a climate change film. He's directing a climate change film that I am producing and working on that. And Julie and I are talking about doing another film about a kind of groundbreaking woman. Surprise, surprise. So it seems to work. So I guess we might do that. But I really thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this. And yeah, and what are you up to? You're going to do a Hoop Dreams series? That sounds good.
Fingers crossed. We're working on it right now. Literally taking out the pitch right now. But I want to pass on my wife's sentiments, because she's an attorney herself. A lot of the subjects that you've covered so far are very, for her, kind of personal heroes. So we look forward to the next.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that's a good note on which to end. Well, thank you so much. It's been so interesting. I mean, we could go on for, I'm sure, much longer, but we've already gone over the time that we scheduled. So we'll just have to have you on again. And look forward to your future creations, both of you. So thank you, and goodbye to everyone, and hope to see you all. Hope to all see you soon.
Yeah.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.